They didn't invite me to the family wedding but sent me a $38,000 bill for my brother's honeymoon. When the invitations were sent out, my name wasn't on any of them, not in the mailbox. Not in the family group chat I learned about the wedding only when my phone lit up with photos of my brother Jake and his fiancée, smiling like they own the world, but I didn't own a seat, instead of a place at the celebration. I got a cold email weeks later, an invoice, $38,000, for flights, hotels, dinners and extravagant honeymoon I wasn't invited to attend, yet somehow expected to finance. My name stamped on the top like a bill I couldn't refuse. The numbers blurred as my hands trembled. I clutched a small velvet box, a childhood gift from my mother, containing a silver bracelet I hadn't worn since Jake's engagement. The bracelet that once symbolized love now felt like a chain tying me to a family that erased me. They wanted my money, not my presence. The pain wasn't just in exclusion, it was in being reduced to a financial resource, a tool to pay for memories I wouldn't share. My absence on their guest list was as loud as the demand for my money. That night, I sat alone with the box in my lap, tracing the delicate links of the bracelet, remembering a time when I thought family meant unconditional love, but love had become a ledger, and I was the debtor. I thought of my mother's smile at the wedding photos, her pride in Jake's new life, and the absence of any regret for leaving me out. I felt like a shadow in a room full of light. They erased me from their vows and then sent me the bill. The injustice burned beneath my skin, a quiet fire of rage and sorrow. I realized then that the family I knew was built on favoritism and neglect, and I was on the outside looking in. The box and bracelet became symbols of my betrayal, reminders that the love I longed for was conditional, given freely to one sibling, withheld from the other. I wrapped the velvet box carefully and tucked it away, a secret kept close to my heart. It was all I had left of the family I once believed in. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I sat in the silence and made a decision. I would not pay for their celebration. I would not finance my own exclusion. They wanted a contribution from the invisible daughter. I chose to disappear instead that night, as the sounds of distant celebration reached my ears. I knew this was the last time I'd let them erase me and expect gratitude in return. Growing up, I always knew I was the other child, not the one who got praised, not the one who got the spotlight. My brother Jake was the golden boy, the favored one, the center of my parents' world. I was the shadow, quietly doing my part but never quite part of the family story. Birthdays were the first sign. Jake's were grand affairs, balloons, presents, parties with all our relatives. Mine were small, understated sometimes. Forgotten entirely. I learned to accept that my celebrations were less important, my happiness secondary. School achievements followed the same pattern. Jake's successes were announced loudly, framed and shared. My awards were acknowledged with vague compliments, quickly overshadowed. I learned that my accomplishments were expected. His were exceptional. When Jake got engaged, the house buzzed with excitement, planning parties, choosing venues, picking colors. It was all for him. For me, there was silence. No invitations, no conversations, no inclusion. Mom always said, "We love you both equally," but love looked different. It was unequal attention, unequal expectations. Jake was given freedom and celebration. I was given responsibility and distance. Dad mostly stayed silent, nodding along. He wanted peace more than fairness. When I asked for his support, he'd remind me, family isn't always fair, but it's forever. I learned to swallow my pain for the sake of forever. Financial decisions were another battlefield. Jake's expenses were covered with enthusiasm. I was expected to contribute, to help. Even when I protested, my protests were brushed aside. As sacrifices for family, the wedding was the climax of this dynamic, a lavish event where Jake was the star, and I was the invisible guest who paid the bills. They never asked if I wanted to attend, they just sent the invoice. I wasn't angry at first, I was numb. I kept hoping for a change, a moment when they'd see me, include me, treat me as equal, but that moment never came. Instead, I was left to grapple with the pain alone, clutching a small silver bracelet, a symbol of the childhood I lost to favoritism. Every family gathering after the wedding was a reminder of what I wasn't: the daughter who wasn't invited, the sister who wasn't celebrated, the woman who wasn't enough. I started distancing myself, retreating into silence and solitude. I needed to heal, to find my worth outside their eyes. That bracelet Once a gift of love became a symbol of my endurance, it reminded me that I survived being invisible in a family built on favoritism. I learned to find strength in being overlooked. The red flags were everywhere, but I was too hopeful to see them clearly. At family dinners, Mom's attention would drift to Jake the moment I tried to share anything. She'd smile politely, then ask Jake about his day, his plans, his successes. I learned quickly that my words were less important. Gifts were another glaring sign. Jake received extravagant presents for every occasion: tech gadgets, trips, jewelry. I got practical things: socks, gift cards, or nothing at all. When I asked Mom about it once, she said, "You don't need much. You're sensible." At holidays, photos told the story. Jake was front and center, laughing with relatives, while I was pushed to the edges or cropped out entirely. I began to expect that my face would be missing or blurred. It hurt, but I swallowed it. Conversations about family plans never included me. I learned about weddings, vacations, and investments secondhand. My absence wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. They assumed I wouldn't protest. When I questioned Mom about the wedding, she told me, "Jake needs more support right now." That phrase became a shield to justify excluding me from everything important. Dad stayed quiet. He seemed to think peace was more important than fairness. When I asked for his support, he said, "Don't make waves." I learned to hide my hurt. Even Jake was part of the pattern. He ignored my attempts to connect, only contacting me when he needed money or favors. Our relationship was transactional, not sibling. When I tried to assert myself, I was labeled too sensitive or difficult. I learned to stay quiet to avoid conflict. Family events became minefields. I walked on eggshells, careful not to upset the fragile dynamics. My silence became a survival tactic. I saw how the favoritism created walls between us, walls I wasn't allowed to climb. I realized the wedding was the final proof. I was not just overlooked, I was deliberately erased. The day the wedding photos were shared with the family group chat, I felt a pit open in my stomach. There was no invitation, no mention, no place for me. But the images spoke volumes. Jake, radiant in his tuxedo, surrounded by smiling relatives. Me, not a face in sight. I scrolled through each photo, searching desperately for a trace of myself, a forgotten shadow, a smudge of belonging, but there was nothing. It was as if I had been airbrushed from their memories, deleted from the album of family history. Then I saw it, a close-up of Jake's wrist adorned with a silver bracelet, the same delicate one my mother had given me as a child. That bracelet I hadn't worn since the engagement announcement, now worn by the brother whose wedding I wasn't invited to attend. They erased my presence but paraded my past. My heart clenched with a pain that was both sharp and suffocating. It wasn't just exclusion, it was humiliation, a public display of my invisibility wrapped in luxury and smiles. The group chat exploded with congratulations and plans for future celebrations. No one noticed my silence, my absence, or the cold weight of the bill I'd received. I tried to speak up, to demand answers, but my words felt swallowed by the noise of their celebration. I was a ghost haunting a party that wasn't mine. The silver bracelet, once a symbol of love and belonging, now felt like a trophy of betrayal. I stared at the photos late into the night, feeling the sting of every smile, every laugh. Every moment I was denied, they sent me the pictures to remind me I wasn't welcome. I carefully placed the bracelet back into its velvet box. The pain was deep, but so was my resolve. I wasn't going to let their neglect define me. I sat in the quiet, letting the hurt settle like ash, and then, slowly, I made a decision. I would no longer be a silent participant in their family drama. They invited me to nothing, but expected me to pay for everything. That night, I vowed to reclaim my worth, not through their approval, but on my own terms. The weeks after the wedding photos haunted me like a shadow I couldn't escape. Each morning I woke up to the silence where family should have been. I stopped answering texts and calls, retreating into a shell of exhaustion and heartbreak. Every buzz on my phone reminded me of what I wasn't part of. At work, I became numb. Meetings blurred together as my mind replayed the images of Jake's wedding, the laughter I wasn't invited to join. I couldn't focus on anything but the invisible chasm between me and the family I thought I belonged to. Friends reached out, but I pushed them away. How could I explain the ache of being erased by blood? How do you say I was billed for a honeymoon I never saw? I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. Nights were the hardest. I'd sit in the dark, clutching the velvet box that held the silver bracelet, my only connection to a childhood that felt stolen. Tears fell silently, mixing grief with anger, longing with despair. I found myself questioning everything. Was I too sensitive? Was I imagining this? But the evidence was clear in every missed invitation, every cold message, every ignored birthday. Therapy helped me name the pain. The betrayal wasn't mine to carry, but it was mine to heal. I learned that being invisible to my family didn't mean I was worthless. I stopped journaling. Words felt useless against the weight of rejection. Silence became my refuge and my prison. I began avoiding family gatherings. The thought of facing their judgment, their indifferent eyes, was unbearable. One night, I wrote a letter I never sent, a raw confession of hurt and hope. I read it aloud, letting the words fall away like a balm for my soul. Sometimes, the hardest fall is the first step to rising. I realized that if I stayed in their shadow, I'd never find my own light, so I made a choice to rise, alone if necessary. The first day I dared to write again, I sat at my desk with trembling hands, opening a fresh notebook. For years, I had hidden my pain in silent corners. Now, I poured it out, raw, unfiltered. And finally free, each word was a step toward reclaiming the self they tried to erase. I wrote about the exclusion, the betrayal, the loneliness, not to blame, but to understand, to make peace with a past that had haunted me. Writing became my refuge, a place where my voice was heard without judgment. For the first time, my voice belonged solely to me. Sharing parts of my story with trusted friends was terrifying yet healing. Their tears and nods told me I wasn't alone. Many had felt the same pain. Invisible to their own families but seen by those who truly cared, therapy helped me unpack the layers of hurt. I learned that their rejection was about their flaws, not mine. It was a lesson in self-worth that no one else could teach me. I set boundaries. I stopped answering calls when respect wasn't there. I refused to be a silent bank for a family that didn't value me. Saying no became an act of courage. The silver bracelet, once a symbol of exclusion, became my talisman of strength. Wearing it daily reminded me of my resilience and growth. They tried to erase me, but I wrote myself back into existence. I booked a solo trip, a gift to myself. For the first time, I traveled not to escape but to discover who I was beyond my family's shadows. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones who saw me, heard me, and celebrated me. Their presence was balm to a wounded soul. I shared my journey online, not seeking sympathy, but offering hope to others trapped in silence. Messages flooded in, stories of similar pain and triumph. Mom called once, her voice tinged with false concern. I chose not to answer. Healing was my priority, not appeasing their guilt. I smiled more, laughed louder, allowed myself joy without guilt or apology. I stopped waiting for their love and started fiercely loving myself. The past still lingered, but it no longer controlled me. I was reclaiming my life, one word, one step, one breath at a time. I didn't respond to their calls, emails, or messages anymore. No explanations, no apologies, just silence. It was a silence louder than any argument. A refusal to play the role they expected me to fill. The invisible daughter who pays and stays quiet. When Olivia posted photos of family events, I didn't comment. I let her words and pictures float in the void. The silence unsettled them more than any confrontation could. I was no longer their background noise. I was a void they couldn't fill. They expected obedience. I gave them absence. The silver bracelet stayed on my wrist every day, a quiet reminder of a childhood stolen but not forgotten. Wearing it felt like reclaiming my own history, not the one they tried to rewrite. I published a collection of essays, raw, honest stories about family, betrayal, and self-worth. Names were changed, but the truth was clear. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition. At my book launch, I read a passage about being erased but choosing to exist anyway. The room was silent except for soft tears and quiet applause. I stood steady. No need for approval, just presence. Dad sent a text, proud of you. I didn't reply, yours too late, and empty words mean nothing. Mom called, desperate to mend bridges. I didn't answer. This was my boundary. Firm, unyielding. I wasn't their background music anymore. I was my own soundtrack. I sent a copy of my book to their house, unmarked, with a single note inside: you gave me silence, I gave you a voice, the last gift they would ever receive from me. That night, I locked the door behind me and felt lighter than ever. The past was there, but it no longer owned me. I was free. Months passed since I chose silence over sorrow, and in that quiet, I found space to breathe again. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but it softened, becoming a part of me, not all of me. I learned that healing isn't linear, it's messy, slow, but possible. I started living for myself, embracing moments that brought me joy, morning coffee rituals, evening walks, deep conversations with friends who saw me fully. These small pleasures stitched together the fabric of a new life, one where I was no longer invisible. The silver bracelet I once hid away became a daily reminder of resilience, polished and shining. It symbolized the journey from neglect to self-acceptance. Wearing it felt like reclaiming the story I was always meant to write. I booked my first solo trip, a gift to myself. Traveling alone, I discovered strengths I never knew I had: courage to face the unknown, freedom to explore, and peace in solitude. It was a turning point, an act of self-love. I shared my story publicly, not for pity, but for power. Through essays and social media, I connected with women who had endured similar pain. Their stories of survival fueled my own healing, reminding me I wasn't alone. Mom and Dad reached out a few times, their voices tentative, filled with regret. I chose not to respond. Protecting my peace was more important than reopening wounds. Healing required boundaries, and I stood firm. I immersed myself in work, friendships, and passions that nurtured my soul. The pain lingered but no longer controlled me. It was a shadow I acknowledged without fear. They cropped me out of their lives, but I framed my own. One evening, sitting by the window, I held the velvet box containing the bracelet. I smiled. Knowing this was more than jewelry, it was a testament to my survival and growth. I decided to gift the bracelet to a friend who had been my anchor. I enclosed a note: carry this as a reminder that even in absence, we find strength. It was a passing of the torch, a symbol of hope. The past no longer defined my worth or dictated my future. I was the author of my own story, free to write new chapters on my terms. I walked away from the shadows of favoritism and into the light of self-love and acceptance, no longer seeking validation. I found peace within. The pain they caused became fuel for my resilience, the silence a canvas for my voice. They didn't invite me to the wedding, but I invited myself to a life of freedom. And that made all the difference.